name is Anca Vlad, and I've been with the UK Data Service for the past 7-8 years or so. I work in the Research Data Services team. So today's session will be a 40 to 45 minute presentation followed by a short quiz. And then we will have time to answer your questions. So as Natalie said, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat or use the Q&A function, and then we'll have a look at them at the end. Okay. Let's start. So first, let's have a brief overview of what we're going to go through today. So I'm also going to stop my video because we don't want any distractions on the screen. Okay. We will start with a short overview of who we are at the UK Data Service and what we do. We will then look at what documentation we need to prepare when planning to share our data, including some examples for you to have a look at. We will also cover data management plans and data security strategies, and then we will answer your questions. I also just wanted to quickly mention that all the information that we will go over today are mostly just highlights, and you can of course find more detailed information available on our website. And of course, we also have other training materials available on YouTube, and I included several links throughout this presentation. And of course, the presentation slides will be made available. I'm sorry, I just need to stop sharing for a second because there's something appearing on my screen. Just bear with me a second. Okay. Right, sorry for that. Okay, so the UK Data Service is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council and is a single point of access for a wide range of secondary social science data. We also provide support and training for data creators with access, managing, sharing, and using data. This is delivered by staff based at universities across the UK, including Essex, where we are based, Manchester, Leeds, Southampton, Edinburgh, and UCL. The UK Data Archive here at the University of Essex manages the UK Data Service, and we also archive the data here. Okay, so a little bit of background. Data sharing, as I'm sure you know, is becoming more and more important across multiple disciplines because it provides benefits not just to ourselves as researchers, but also to our institutions, our funders, and general public more widely. It is essential here that we have good research data management habits, because if we don't deal with data management considerations early on in our projects, it can lead to potential problems later on. For example, if adequate consent is not obtained to share the data collected or consider the complexities of data anonymization early on, it might lead to more work for us down the line. So the core message here is to think about data management throughout the whole life cycle of the research project and write down a data management plan to enable us to keep track of actions. And I'm sure you know nowadays many funders and publishers have specific requirements for data handling and require a data management plan, often referred to as a DMP, included in the initial grant application to ensure that researchers have considered these aspects early on. Okay, so why is data management so important, and why is it important that we manage data well? Well, to begin with, so data creation research is often very expensive, and this is not just in terms of money, but also time invested in creating and documenting novel data. That, and of course, that data itself is you know, the cornerstone of research, if you will, and the hope is that good quality data will lead to very good quality research and results. Furthermore, this data underpins all our published research findings, and so by ensuring that we manage our data well, it enables us to comply with ethical codes, data protection laws, journal requirements, as well as our funders' policies. It's also important here to protect what might be personal as well as other types of data from loss, destruction, and of course, potential exposure. Okay, so moving on, some very simple practical steps that us as researchers can take would be, firstly, of course, writing a data management plan at the very beginning of the research project. So this is, as I mentioned now, a requirement for most funders to ensure aspects such as storage, processing, access, destruction are well thought in advance. It's very likely that there will be local support at your your own university or institution that can help you in this regard. So as I mentioned, we do have extensive guidance on our website on how to write a data management as well. And we do have a link to that included in this presentation as well. Also very important is that the data can be shared with others and understood at the point of using it. So therefore, consent is essential for being able to share that data if consent is chosen as the processing ground under the latest data protection legislation. So we would need to, if we choose consent, then we would need to obtain this from all our participants before we can share that data. So depending on what participants agree, we might not be able to disclose their identities, and here anonymization and access controls are essential, which we will have a look at as well. We also need to think in advance about the type of software and formats that we choose in our project. So using formats which are closed or proprietary mean that others may not be able to access them in the future, or standards may change and develop over time. So they might not be compatible with new versions. So it's also important, actually essential, that we provide context or metadata and documentation with our data so that others can understand the data that we collected. We're also going to have a closer look at that. And finally, of course, it's important to ensure that we protect the data throughout the project lifecycle by means of secure storage and encryption. And we're also going to discuss a bit more on that as well. Okay, so next I wanted to have a look at the different sections of a data management plan that this should ideally touch upon. So these include an assessment of any relevant existing data that might be of use, so that collection of new data might not be necessary or can perhaps be restricted, or establishing that there is no similar data available, which means you have to collect we have to collect new data to base our findings on. The DMP should also describe in detail how you're planning on going about collecting this new data and from who, etc. So what is your population of interest? This is linked to procedures you'll need to set in place to ensure that the new data collected meets certain quality standards. So how this data will be stored, of course, securely, in brackets here, and there will be, and where it will be backed up to avoid any data loss. Another section should address any difficulties foreseen in sharing this data for replication or reuse, be it in an archive or institutional repository. For example, if secondary data is used, that will mean copyright might prevent you from disseminating that data at the end of the project. So, or it might be that the appropriate permissions need to be set in place to allow you to archive that data. Another important section is around issues of consent, anonymization, and potential reuse strategies. So in terms of going back to copyright, so we need to think about who will own this copyright over the data collected. Would it be yourself as the person who's collecting it, your institution? Will your participants maintain any copyright over their data, or will there be shared copyright? It might be the case that you need to address this in your consent form or information sheet. So again, planning in advance. Another aspect to consider is who in the research team will be responsible for and which parts or aspects of collecting the data, storing it, backing it up, encryption, cleaning, anonymization, and of course at the end archiving the data. Finally, there's a section on management and curation. So you can find more using the link provided on the slide. So please make sure to have a look at that because it includes more information. Sorry. At the UK Data Archive, so there are varieties of ways in which we protect participants' identities while also ensuring that that we comply with legal and ethical obligations. And we refer to this as a three-step approach. So to begin with, it's important to establish what legal gateway, also referred to as processing ground, applies to that particular data collection and processing. So if the legal gateway used this consent, then it's important to ensure that you seek informed granular consent to share and preserve the data in the long term. Following from this is ensuring that you protect your participants' identities at all time in line with what they agreed in their consent forms. This can be done by anonymizing or pseudonymizing the data. It might be that you do not need to collect someone's personal information. So here I'm referring to the data minimization principle. So only collect data that is absolutely necessary. This is this refers in particular to personal data, but the point here is only to collect data that we need for our projects and no more. The third aspect is to consider is access regulation, which is normally needed for the data that even after anonymization or pseudonymization still contains a residual disclosure risk or data that cannot be anonymized sufficiently without reducing reuse potential. So there, we also have a separate webinar on data anonymization and pseudonymization, and we run that regularly. So do make sure that you check the final slides in this presentation because you'll see information about when you can join that as well if you're more interested in data anonymization and pseudonymization. Okay, moving on, let's look at how to best document our data to make sure it's reusable. So the most important thing when we talk about documentation is simply that we need to ask ourselves what would other users need with no prior knowledge of the data in order to understand it and possibly reuse it correctly in their projects, right? So what information would they need to make sense of it? Here at the UKDA, we also archive this as supporting documentation in our collections, and it also allows us to ensure accurate processing and data disclosure review before we can publish data. So what exactly should be included as documentation when archiving data? So examples, excuse me, excuse me. Examples include a methodology file, explaining how the data was collected, sample size, fieldwork protocols, codebook, user guide, blank versions of version of the consent forms and information sheets that were used, the questionnaire that was used, a data list, and we will have a closer look at what the data list is. And of course, any links to reports, publications, or any other related data. Of course, if the data can be linked to any other data sources, then we also need to know that. And preferably DOIs should be provided if they exist. because they're a persistent identifier as opposed to a simple URL, which might not exist in a couple of years. Okay, so looking at data level documentation, so in particular variable names and variable labels, we're going to have a quick look at that. So all structures or tabular data should have adequate variable names as well as variable labels and value labels. In terms of variable names, we have a few suggestions here. So very important is to ensure that they match the question numbers in the questionnaire that was used. Also because that questionnaire will also be archived as documentation, right? Also is important to use meaningful abbreviations, and for interoperability across platforms, we recommend that variable names should not exceed 8 characters. Similarly for variable labels, so some of the same applies. Make sure that they reference the question text and that it includes units of measurement where that is applicable. Value labels as well, ensure that they are described as well, and that missing values are declared and differences between these are recorded separately. So, you know, missing as opposed to skipped questions, etc. Okay, next I wanted to include information about a user guide because I mentioned it earlier. So this should give you an example as well. So a user guide can contain any project specific information that would be needed to understand the data, such as the interview schedule, methodology, study findings, consent procedures, transcription notes, code book, etc. Of course, because you will have access to the slides, I included a very good example here for you to have a look at. So because we mentioned a data list previously, and so this can be archived along with qualitative data. This is a piece of documentation that we ask researchers to submit with qualitative data, and there's an example here on how this could look like, and the information it should contain. Of course, this is specific for that project, but this is customizable for everything. We also have a template of this that you can just download and fill in, and I included the link to the template at the end of this presentation. So so we refer to this data list as a map to the collection because it provides an at-a-glance summary, if you will, of all the files that were archived. So this is very useful for a user and also for yourself as well if you are to come back to your project in a few years' time and need to remember this information in one in one file. Another example why this is useful is that, you know, if someone were to be interested in a subsample, for example, in this case, if someone were interested in farms larger than 300 hectares, they can open this file and see exactly, you know, what file they need to go to because we have the file name. And we also have some more useful information as well. Okay. When we think about transcription templates, so these should possess a unique identifier and adopt a uniform layout throughout the research project. Speaker tags should be used to identify who is speaking when, include line breaks, and be page numbered. Every file should have a document header giving brief details of the interview and interviewee or focus group participants, etc. What applies. And we have an example here. You can see how a transcript can look like and the information it can contain. So it is clear here who is speaking when. So we have respondent and interviewee, sorry. And there are line breaks in between, and there is useful information at the top about the interviewee. So of course, information that we have permission to share. And so we have age in this case, gender, occupation, and you can also have a closer look at the whole file. So this is just a short extract using the link at the bottom. Okay, another very important aspect to consider are file formats. So making sure that we consider what are the most appropriate software to use for our projects. So as I'm sure you're aware, digital data is very much software dependent, and we need to, as much as possible, be able to predict how that software will behave in the future. So it's worth pointing out that for long-term preservation, the best formats to use that should be used are standard, interchangeable, and open software. For more information about what exactly that means for the data you're collecting, please see our guidance on recommendable. So we also have a list on recommended and acceptable formats on our website. So please have a look there. Okay, other practical considerations during a project include making sure that we organize the data and the documentation logically and in a manner that is easy to understand. So make sure that you group files by date, data type, or location. Of course, this is very much project dependent. And that they follow a hierarchical structure. Also make sure to use version control. This is also very important for files and just to make sure that we know what the final version is, and also to keep track of different versions is very important. Okay. Okay, we will now have a brief look at data security and storage issues. So as I'm sure you know, it is very important when collecting data to think in advance about the mechanisms and procedures that we need to put in place to prevent things like unauthorized access, use, change, disclosure, destruction of our data, right? So what are possible solutions and how do we go about adopting a data security strategy, if we call it that way. So some of this information is perhaps, I know, very basic, but it is essential to avoid issues that we spoke about in the previous slide. So controlling access to computers by using secure passwords and locking our computers when away, ensuring that our antivirus protection is up to date, that we protect our computers from power surges that might render them useless, restricting access, right, particularly to sensitive and personal information, is essential. Always making sure that we keep anonymized data separate from any keys or any data that still contains, identifying information. Ensure that we utilize encryption as well across all devices and at all locations. So this is a safer, more secure options than simply using passwords. So for instance, if someone were to steal or have access to your laptop, they can access your files even if your laptop is password protected, simply by removing the hard drive and installing it into another device. So yes, make sure that you look into encryption and that you use that ideally. Finally, ensure that we need to ensure that we properly dispose of unwanted copies of the data and any equipment at the end of the project. And again, what is the most important thing to remember here is that we need to separate, we need to apply more protection depending on what the data contains, right? So personal data will need more protection than anonymized data. So while some solutions might be appropriate for some types of data, they might not be appropriate for personal information. And because we touched on encryption, I included on this slide some options for you. So just to mention that we do not recommend one in particular. You might opt for one over another depending on what your operating system is or what exactly you need encrypted. So whether you wish to encrypt an entire hard drive or just a particular file or folder or a USB stick, at the end of this presentation as well, there will be a UKDS playlist, which includes some tutorials on how to use different encryption software. So please have a look at that as well. Right, it's this is what I was talking about. So this is the slide. I thought it was further down, but yeah, so we have VeraCrypt, ASCrypt, FileVault 2, BitLocker, Time Machine, and MD Summer. So please have a look at them. They do walk you through how to set up and how to encrypt different files or hard drives or yeah, so do have a look at that. Another aspect to consider is having a digital backup strategy to avoid data loss or data destruction, sorry. So there are multiple things to consider here, such as, what do we need to back up, where, what type of media we can use, how often we need to duplicate or synchronize the information that we back up, for how long do we need to keep it, and here there might be different data retention policies that apply. So this, of course, you should consult with your institution, your ethics committee or your funder. Also is very important that you check these backups regularly to ensure that they're still in working condition. And you might wonder why this is so important. So there have been, perhaps you know, there have been multiple cases recorded, some quite a few actually over social media, where the only copy of the data has been destroyed during a house fire, for example, or stolen or forgotten in a train. So having the data backed up in a secure location prevents you or prevents us from losing time-consuming work or results, or having to, of course, collect new data if the only copy is destroyed. Okay, looking at file sharing now. So in some projects, we need to share our files with research partners, and doing this over email is not considered good. So please try to avoid doing that. There are other options, better, more secure options. So there are virtual research environments available or locally managed, such as OwnCloud or Zen2. We use Zen2 here at the University of Essex, or physical media can be sent encrypted through the post. There are cloud solutions as well, such as Google Drive or Dropbox. However, we have to be cautious about security concerns in this case with Google Drive and Dropbox. What we recommend here is just to assess the risk of using cloud storage. Whether these are appropriate for your data, and a very good idea would be we recommend that you consult with your university or institute for advice on this. Here at the archive, we don't advise storing personal data or commercially sensitive data in the cloud. So for more information on this, you can check our guidance online. Okay. Okay, so moving on to one of the final slides, looking at data disposal. So this is very important to consider at the end of the research project. If we have personal information or copies on hard drives, if we simply delete that data, that is not typically not sufficient, right? Deletion only unflags the files. So if we write over that data by reformatting, that is also considered not sufficient. If it is incredible, again, we have to think about what type of data and what is stored on that device. However, if we're talking about incredibly sensitive data, personal data, the only way of ensuring its complete destruction of that data is to physically destroy that hard drive, and there are specialist services that can do that. Also included some software here for you, but again, do check with your institution because they should be able to help you with this. So as I said in the beginning, this presentation was just a summary of main aspects that need considering during a research project from a data management point of view. We have, however, a lot of useful information and resources on our website, including recurring webinars such as this one, workshops and other training materials. I also included here a link to our managing and sharing research data book, published by Sage. I mentioned different tools and templates and links that I included in this presentation. So here they are. So we have a data list template that I talked through. We have a transcription template. We also have a model consent form, and so you can just download that and adapt to your project. So you have these links here. Um, we have some further resources here if you're interested in reading more, and I'll leave that with you. Of course, there's some information on how to know more about us and get connected if you have any questions as well, how to find us on different social media, and then of course the slides will be available on our website. I also included here a list of upcoming events, so workshops, conferences. The second part of this data management basics workshop, touching on ethical and legal issues and data sharing, also depositing data with Reshare, which is our self-deposit repository, which I'll be running next week. So you can find this if you go on the UK Data Service website under the upcoming events section. So now we're going to move on to the quiz, and I will just stop sharing. Sorry, clicked the wrong button. I will stop sharing my screen, and Natalie, if you are able to please copy this information in the chat. So you can do this in a separate tab on your PC or on your phone, on your tablet. That's fine. And I'm just going to share my screen again in a second. While you join. So if you go to www.menti.com and you'll be prompted to insert a code. Thank you, Natalie, for putting that in the chat. Okay, so 7274 7378. Okay. So I see that we have people joining. So we will have about 14, 15 questions, and this will also be a discussion. So I am sharing my screen, so you will be able to see the questions and the answers as well if you're not able to join the quiz. However, it would be, of course, more interactive if the more people join and contribute and answer the questions. It is, if you haven't used Mentimeter before, the answers are anonymous as well, so don't worry, you won't be put on the spot or anything. I'm just gonna wait maybe 30 seconds more. I see we have 12 people that have joined, 15 now, 18, right, so getting there. I see we're on track with time as well. So the presentation took about 40 minutes. So it will be, we'll go through the quiz, we'll have a short discussion, and then we'll still have time for to look at questions. Okay, so we have 20 people that have joined so far. 21. I do want to wait for as many of you to join, because if I start it, then you might not be able to join. So I don't want to. I see that, okay, we have 22 now, and I said 30 seconds, so I'm not gonna I'm not gonna wait. 23, okay. 24. So again, you have to go to www.menti.com and just use this code to join our quiz. 25, okay. Okay, I think I should, I'll start with the first question. Right, so just it would be interesting to know if there's a particular aspect of data management that you are mostly interested in, the reason perhaps why you chose to join our workshop today. If you just type in the answer, then I should also be able to perhaps refer you to other resources we have and see if okay, so we have devising a plan. I think you perhaps referring to a data management plan. I know we only touched briefly on that, but as I said, there we have further resources on our website on how to do that. I see quite a few answers about creating a good plan. So yes, please make sure to have a look at the further resources I linked at the end of the presentation. Sharing interview data, okay, data management plan again, documentation required, sensitive data, guidelines and best practices, okay, how to clearly label and organize, guidelines and best practices, ensuring confidentiality and anonymization while building a data management plan. Okay, as I said, I know we didn't touch much on anonymization, but that's because we have a separate webinar on that. So do make sure to have a look at our events. That was actually last week. We ran it last Thursday, but there should be another one in the fall, hopefully that. But there is a recording of the one that we ran last week. So maybe have a look on YouTube. You should be able to find it. Okay. Okay. How does it, we will also use this to build our next webinar, just to see whether we are you know, we're covering everything that you're interested in. Data sharing, data storage options, documentation requires metadata, sharing interview data. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next question. What type of data do you work with or you're interested in? And by this, I mean, do you mostly work with qualitative data, quantitative data, or if you want to be more, you know, more precise or provide a bit more detail about data you're using, please feel free. Okay, qualitative data, anonymized survey data, qualitative and quantitative. Okay, so it's a mixture, most of both, I see. Text-based data, crime data, okay. Mixed methods, research, online surveys and interviews, quantitative, qualitative. Okay, so I see there's a good mix here of qualitative. Okay, I see. Oh, thank you very much. It's good to know that we have both quantitative dual qual, so it would be good to know more on both. Big data and qualitative data, patient data, mainly quantitative, video, visual, audio. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to a quiz, more of a quiz type. Of the part of this. So what projects need a data management plan or a DMP? So do all projects need one? Is it just UKRI funded projects, projects that collect new data, ESRC funded projects, or not sure? So I see that I have a unanimity of, well, not unanimity, we'll have one other answer, but the majority is all projects, and I'm very glad to see this. So yes, indeed, that is the correct answer. All projects ideally should have a data management plan. it is very important to have all the aspects that are covered by a data management plan clearly addressed at the beginning of each project to avoid, even if we use secondary data, for example, we still need to think about storage, encryption, backup, etc. Sharing. Okay, so I'm glad to see that the majority of you think that all projects need a data management plan. We have a statement here that a data management plan should be a living document. And by a living document, we mean a document that is updated regularly throughout the project. So if anything changes, then the DMP should be updated accordingly. Okay, I see the majority is think that this is true, and yes, indeed that is true. So a data management plan should be set, should be put together as early as possible in the project, at the start of the project, the research project, and should be updated throughout the project. So if anything were to happen or change, then that should be reflected in the data management plan. For example, if throughout the project you decide to collect more data, or you decide to add perhaps you were doing quant research and you decide to also add a qual element to your project, then of course that should be reflected in your data management plan, along with all the considerations that come with that. Okay. The next question, when is data sharing not possible? So when the consent form did not cover data sharing, when data is sensitive, when there is a risk of identification present, when the participant has opted out, or all of the above. Okay, interesting. Interesting to see your responses. So the majority of you said all of the above, and well, that's not the answer we were going for, and let's see why. So I see there's also quite a few of you that said that the consent form did not cover data sharing. So yes, that is not great and is not ideal, and it shouldn't happen, right? Consent form should cover data sharing, and participants should give their consent for that to happen. However, there is still a possibility of obtaining retrospective consent, right? So even if the consent form did not cover data sharing, then there is still an option there to share that data if retrospective consent is possible. Another option, the data is sensitive. Again, I can point you to so many data collections that we hold at the UK Data Service where you would consider the data to be sensitive. And of course, that's why we talk about pseudonymization, and we talk about access controls. So of course, the data, depending on the amount of detail and sensitivity, if you will, in the data, then we apply access restrictions. And again, please have a look through our data catalog, because there are quite a few collections that would fit in this category, and the data has been successfully shared, and there has been consent to share that data, and there's it has been placed on the appropriate access level after pseudonymization. Risk of identification is present. I see that nobody selected that, and I'm glad, because that's also not the correct answer. Of course, there's plenty of data out there that still has a risk of identification, and we need to think about data reuse and the value in that data, right? And if we were to strip it out of absolutely everything, then the reuse value of that data will decrease. So we do, and that is why we have pseudonymization, anonymization, and access restrictions to compensate and mitigate that risk. So the option that we're going for here was the participant opted out, because this is the only scenario out of the ones presented here where that would be a dead end, right? So there's nothing that can nothing that can happen for past the participants opting out. So that is a definite no, the data cannot be shared. Okay. Right, next question. When should we put together and update the data management plan? So tick all that apply. So before the data is collected, before the data is shared, at the end of the project, throughout the project, and at the beginning of the project. Okay, so I see the popular options here are I'm glad to see that these are the popular options. Okay, so we have at the beginning of the project, throughout the project, and before data collection. As the most popular answers, the answers we were looking for were at the beginning of the project and throughout the project, right? So thinking back of that question about the MP being a living document, so this needs to be updated throughout the project to account for any changes. And of course, it should be set up at the very beginning of the project. Of course, before data collection, but even before that. So when we were talking about, setting up the project methodology and how we're going to collect data, what the population would be. So we're talking about the very beginning of the project. That's the ideal time to set up the DMP. And okay, so I see that the popular answers were what we were looking for, so that's very good. What can we prevent by having a data management plan in place? So we have data loss, we have breach participant confidentiality, we have inability to share data, we have unexpected costs, or all of the above. And I think this is an easy one, right? So yeah, so all of the above, that's the answer we were looking for, as we discussed in the presentation. These are only a few of the scenarios that we're trying to, well, that ideally should be covered in a data management plan that would help us avoid any problems. Okay. Moving on to the next question, who is responsible for data management in a research team? Is it the PI, so the personal investigator? Is it a data support officer, university or institution, or is this to be delegated for each project? Okay, so I see that the most popular option is to be delegated for each project, and also the principal investigator. So the answer we're going for here was to be delegated for each project. So well done. But also saying that the principal investigator is responsible is not incorrect either. So the idea here is that whoever is responsible needs to be clearly specified in the data management plan. So if it is the personal investigator, then that is fine. If perhaps if it's a big project, right, and you have multiple people that are responsible for different aspects, right? So if perhaps someone is responsible for anonymization, someone else is responsible for transcription, someone else is responsible for data sharing. It's just important that this is clearly established in the data management plan, and you have the exact person there responsible for everything. Okay. Right. Okay, moving on, what are the benefits of having a data management plan? So we have complying with funder requirements, helping to stay organized, helping anticipate costs, helping prepare against any risks, or all of the above. Again, I think this is an easy one. Yes, we were going for all of the above. So as I said, more and more funders now require having a data management plan. It helps us stay organized, especially if we keep keeping it as a living document. It helps anticipate costs because we can think ahead of, any, for example, costs for transcription or anonymization, or if we were to only think of that when we were to share the data, it might be that we have no money left or no time left to do that at the end of the project. So it helps us with that, and it helps us prepare against risks, as we mentioned before. So we have data loss, we have destruction, disclosure, access by people who shouldn't be accessing it, etc. Okay, so very good on that. Another statement, password protection is sufficient. So we have true, false, it can be, or not sure. Okay, so quite okay, so the most popular answers are false and it can be. And those were the answers we were looking for. So going back to the conversation during the presentation, so it very much depends on what we are protecting, right? So if we are protecting a drive that has very sensitive identifying information, then password protection is not sufficient. If we are just keeping on that anonymized information that doesn't have any problematic sensitive content, then password protection is sufficient. So of course we want to ideally, and what we recommend is to always use the safest route. So if you can use encryption on everything, that would be the ideal, right? But just keep in mind that for if we're talking about identifying sensitive personal information, then that is definitely not something that can be only password protected. Okay, so very good. The most popular answers were what we were looking for. Okay, what should be added under costing in a data management plan? So we have digitization, we have transcription, translation, all of the above. Okay. Another simple one here, I guess, is just to bring really these concepts up and discuss them. So yes, the correct answer is all of the above. And so we need to think about digitization, right? That is something that will probably potentially cost us money and time. Transcription as well. Translation, if we are conducting data in any any languages that are not English, and we are looking to share the data in an archive, for example, we might want to translate it before. So all of these can imply a cost of both money and time. So the earliest we think about solutions in the data management plan and we allocate resources, the better. And we do have a costing tool as well, before I forget. I did not include, I don't think it is included in the presentation, but I will try to put this on the chat before. So right after we finish this exercise, I'm going to have a quick look and include the link on the chat. Or actually, I will edit the presentation before we share it. So if you will find the presentation online, I will include it in the presentation and it should be available there. Okay, thinking of file naming, what should be included in a file name? So we have the date of creation, description of content, we have version number, name of creator, project number, and file extension. And you can tick all that applies here. Okay, so I see there's a variety of answers here. So again, it depends. There is a bare minimum really that should be included in a file name, and that is it depends, of course, if that is relevant. But ideally, date of creation, description of content, version number, and file extension. So those are the must, if you will. It might be that, of course, the name of the creator, it might be that that is not relevant if it's just a small project where there's only one person or two or three working on something. It might be that that's not necessary. If there's only one version, then that again is not relevant. If we don't have a project number, then that is not relevant, but the bare minimum should be the date of creation, a relevant description of content, and the file extension, and the version number, again, if that applies. Okay, how many backup copies of the data should we have? At least 2 in separate locations, at least 3 in separate locations. Perhaps 1 is enough, or are we not sure? Okay, so I see the most popular answer is at least 2 in separate locations. And while that is good, we were actually looking for at least 3 in separate locations. That is what we recommend as best practice, just because it gives that extra safety, if you will. If you only have, because there's so many different causes, right, of something, of a copy not working. It might be hardware malfunction, it might be you know, a house fire, you might lose it, you might. So it's really, having 2 is pretty good. Definitely better than just having 1. However, if we want to be extra secure and just making sure that we are definitely not losing that the content on those hardware or copies, sorry, then at least 3. That's what we recommend. Okay. And because we just talked about backup, what are causes of data loss? So we have hardware failure, we have software malfunction, we have malware of hacking, we have human error, or we have theft, national disaster, or fire. I see, this is excellent. Yes, we were looking for all of them, really. They're all examples of how data can be lost or you know, used by someone who shouldn't be using it or accessing it in a case of theft. So that is why backing up is so important to be able to avoid and prevent all these scenarios. Okay, according to studies, what incentives motivate researchers to archive and publish their data? Please tick all that apply. So we have career benefits, we have scientific progress, we have norms, and we have external drivers. Okay, right, so we have yeah, so these are actually the 4 most popular answers in the studies that we and they're referenced as well in a further slide. So the 4 more popular options, so we have career benefits, scientific progress, norms, and external drivers. So external drivers there was defined as, you know, the publication asked them to share the data that was backing it up, or it was a funder that required that data to be shared. And I think the other 3 are pretty self-explanatory. Okay. Articles for which the underlying data is published are more frequently cited, more than articles for which this is not the case. So again, this is according to the same studies we used in the previous slide. So is this true or false? We're not sure. Okay, so I see that we have true and not sure. Okay, well, it is true. So articles for which the underlying data has been made available are indeed more frequently cited than articles for which that is not the case. And I linked here the studies that, if you want to have a bit, we want to have a look at that. That is indeed true. So making sure that we are able to share our data at the end of the project is very, very important. And data management is really one of the main enablers, if you will, to allow us to do that. And then we have, it is recommended that the data is published or archived as soon as the collection ends. Why do you think that is? And it's strange that we already have some answers here. Probably from a previous session, and I did clear all of the answers, but somehow this one remained. Apologies for that. You should still be able to answer. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's best for the data to be published or archived as soon as the collection ends? Is it because the knowledge about the data is highest? We have the least time to prepare the data, highest data quality, or that archives would not accept it later? Okay, so the correct answers here are that because the knowledge about the data is highest, you know, documentation might get lost in time if it's not well kept, or metadata, or, you know, we might forget important details about the project that we would be able to remember as soon as the collection ends. And so that also leads back to the second answer, so there will be least time to prepare for us as the researcher who is collecting the data, because everything is just fresh, we have it, it's there, and also highest data quality, right? So for the reasons that we already discussed, so there might be that, you know, there are there might be reasons why data might not be you know, at its highest quality in time. So it might be that the software that has been used is you know, there has been changes in time, or the data has been mislocated, or we don't remember where we placed it, or so really the data should be published as soon as the collection ends. Archives would accept it. That was the only answer that was not appropriate here. Okay, so we reached the end of the presentation. So I'm gonna stop sharing.